This is the story of Salam Turjuman's journey to the Wall of Yajuj and Majuj from the book Al-Masalik Al-Mamalik by Ibn Khordadhaba. Salam Turjuman told me that when Al-Wathiq Billah saw in his dream that the wall that Dhul-Qarnain had built between us and Gog and Magog had opened, he asked for a man to send him out to the place of the wall so that he would inform him of its news. So Ashnas said, "There is no one here who is fit for this mission except Salam Turjuman, because he can speak 30 languages." And Salam Turjuman said, "So Al-Wathiq Billah called me and said, I want you to go out to the wall so that you can inspect it and bring me news of it." And he joined me with 50 strong young men, and he gave me 5,000 dinars and 10,000 dirhams as blood money. He ordered that each man be given 50,000 dirhams and a year's livelihood. And he ordered that felt and leather clothing to be prepared for the man. And he gave me 200 mules to carry the provisions and water. So we went with a letter from the city called Sirru Man Ra'a of Al-Wathiq Billah to Ishaq son of Ismail, the king of Armenia. Then we left, taking a letter from Ishaq to the king of Sarir. Then we took another letter from the king of Sarir to the king of the Alans. And after that, from the king of the Alans to Vilan Shah, and from Vilan Shah to Tarkan, king of the Khazars. So we stayed with the king of the Khazars for a day and a night, and he sent 5 guides with us. Then we traveled for 26 days until we ended up in a black, stinky land. Before entering it, we had supplied ourselves with vinegar to avoid its unpleasant odor, so we traveled there for 10 days. Then we came to ruined cities, and we walked there for 20 days. So we asked about the condition of those cities, and we were told that Gog and Magog were dwelling in those cities, but they destroyed them. Then we came to fortresses near the mountain where the wall was, and in those fortresses there were people who spoke Arabic and Persian, and they were Muslims and could recite the Quran, and they had mosques, so they asked us where we were coming from. So we told them that we were the messengers of the commander of the faithful, Al-Wathiq Billah. So they said in amazement, "Commander of the faithful?" So we said, "Yes." And they said, "Is he old or young?" We said, "He is a young man." And again they were amazed. So they said, "Where is he?" And we said, "In Iraq, in a city called Sirru Man Ra'a." And they said, "We have never heard of this." And between each of these fortresses and the last fortress was 1 to 2 leagues, and maybe less or more. Then we came to a city called Aika. Its square was 10 leagues, and the city had iron gates that were to be opened from above. There were farms and farmlands in the city, and it was the city where Dhul-Qarnain used to camp with his soldiers. The distance between the Aika city and the wall was a 3-day journey. And there were between the city and the wall fortresses and villages all the way until we reached the place of the wall on the 3rd day. And it was a round mountain, and it was mentioned that Gog and Magog were under this mountain, and they were 2 nations. The people mentions that Gog was taller than Magog, and the length of one of them was between a cubit and a cubit and a half, and maybe less or more. Then we came to a high mountain where we saw a fortress on it, and the wall that Dhul-Qarnain had built was a gap between two mountains 200 cubits wide, and it was the road by which Gog and Magog would emerge and disperse into the earth. So he dug its foundation 30 cubits downward and built it with iron and copper until it became level with the face of the earth. Then he raised two pillars from the side of the mountain on both sides of the cliff. Each pillar was 25 cubits wide and 50 cubits thick. The visible part of them at the bottom was 10 cubits outside the gate. It was all built with bricks of iron overlaid with copper. The brick was a cubit and a half by a cubit and a half and 4 fingers in thickness, with an iron rod that its ends were mounted on the pillars, and its length was 120 cubits. On each pillar there was 10 cubits by 5 cubits wide, and above the rod was a building of iron bricks and copper, reaching the top of the mountain, and its height was as far as the eye could see. The building above the rod was about 60 cubits, and upon it were balconies of iron. At the end of each balcony were two corners, each one folded over the other. The length of each balcony was 5 cubits, and its width was 4 cubits, and all the balconies were 37 in total. And there was an iron door with two hanging leaves. Each leaf was 50 cubits wide, 75 cubits high, and 5 cubits thick, and they were erected in a swivel upon the rod of the gate. No wind could enter through the door or from the mountain, and on the door was a lock 7 cubits long and as thick as a span, and the lock could not be held even by 2 men, and the height of the lock from the ground was 25 cubits. And above the lock was another lock, whose length was more than the length of the lower lock, and its handles were 2 cubits for each handle, and on the lock was a hanging key that was a cubit and a half long, and the key was 4 spans round, and it was suspended on a chain welded to the door, 8 cubits long and 4 spans round, and the ring that was in the chain was like the ring of a catapult. The threshold of the door was 10 cubits wide by 100 cubits, except for what was under the 2 pillars, and what was visible of it was 5 cubits, and its cubit was in the black cubit size, and along with the door were 2 forts. Each fort was 200 cubits by 200 cubits, and on the door of these 2 forts were 2 trees, and between the 2 forts was a fresh spring, and in one of the 2 forts was the construction machine with which the wall was built, made of iron pots and iron ladles, and on each stove were 4 pots. There was a remainder of the iron bricks that stuck to each other because of the rust, and the watcher of those forts used to come there every Monday and Thursday, and his people inherited that door just as the caliphs inherited the caliphate. The watcher used to come riding in a company of 3 men, and each man had on his neck a step, and there was a step on the door as well. So the man would climb to the top of the step and hit the lock at the beginning of the day. Then he would hear Gog and Magog making a noise like a hornet's cooing. Then they would quiet. Then, when it was noon, he would hit the lock again, and he would listen to the door, so their noise the second time would be stronger than the first. Then they would quiet. Then, when it was afternoon, he would hit the lock for the third time, and they would make a noise like the previous time. He stays there until sunset, then he leaves. The purpose of knocking on the lock is to hear those behind the door, so that they know that there are keepers, and so that the watcherman and his people know that Gog and Magog still cannot unlock the door. And near this place was a large fortress. Its size was 10 leagues by 10 leagues, and its width was 100 leagues. Salam Turjuman said, "So he said to the people of the forts who were present, 'Is there any damage in this door?' They said, 'There is nothing in it except this crack,' and the crack was as wide as a fine thread. So I said, 'Do you fear anything on the door?' They said, 'No.' This door is 5 cubits thick in Alexander's cubit, and it is a cubit and a half in the black cubit size. Each cubit is the size of Alexander's cubits." Salam Turjuman said, "So I approached the door and took out a knife from my slipper and scratched the place of the crack. Then I took out a dirham and wrapped it in a handkerchief to show it to Al-Wathiq Billah. And on the top of the white door leaf was written on iron in the first song, 'But when the promise of my Lord comes to pass, he will level it to the ground, and my Lord's promise is ever true.' When we looked at the building, most of it was lined with yellow stuff of copper and black stuff of iron. And in the mountain there was a carved place where the doors were cast, the place of the pots in which copper was mixed, the place where lead and copper were boiled. And there were big pots, each with 3 loops, and in the pots were chains and hooks with which the copper was transported over the wall. And we asked those who were there whether they had seen anyone of Gog and Magog, and they mentioned that they once saw some of them on top of the mountain. Then a black wind blew and threw them to their side, and the size of one man was, as far as the eye could see, a span and a half. And the mountain from the outside had neither a body nor a foot, nor was there any plant, grass, tree, or anything else, and it was a flat, upright, white mountain. When we left, the guides took us to the area of Karsan, and their king was called Alab. Then we left that place and went to the place of a king called Tabanwin, who was the owner of the tax. So we stayed with them for days, and we walked from that place until we reached Samarkand in 8 months. And we came to Aspishab, and we crossed the Balik River. Then we went to Ostroshana, to Bokhara, and to Tirmiz. Then we arrived in Nishapur. 22 were the men who traveled with us. Some of them died, and some of them fell ill on the way. Whoever died of them was buried in his clothes, and whoever fell ill, we left him behind in some village, and 14 men died during the return. So we came to Nishapur with 14 men, and the people of the forts gave us enough provisions. Then we went to Abdullah son of Tahir, and he gave me 8,000 dirhams, and he gave each man with me 500 dirhams. And out of all the mules we had, only 23 survived. And we arrived in the city of Sirru Man Ra'a. So I went to Al-Wathiq Billah and told him our story, and showed him the iron piece that I brought out the door. He thanked Allah and ordered charity to be given away, and he gave each man of us 1,000 dinars. We reached the place of the wall in 16 months and went back in 12 months and days. So Salam Turjuman told me this story, which was in a book that was written for Al-Wathiq Billah.